Here we are in our final topic for Unit 3. We're on immunity. So it's a really relevant topic this year, and I hope that by the end of this little unit you have a really good understanding of what's happening, and when you hear things in the media you can question them properly, and that's kind of the main point of this whole unit. So let's get started. First off, we're going to start talking about the types of immunity. So you need to understand these 4 words, and usually that you answer a question or you say them in pairs. So we're going to look at the difference between natural and artificial immunity, and the difference between active and passive strategies for getting that immunity. So let's just jump straight into these. In class, I'll give you a chance to brainstorm and come together with what you think the difference between passive and active is, and then what you think the difference between natural and artificial is. But right now, let's just go through what they are. So passive immunity, sometimes you call it the lazy approach. Essentially, it's just the transfer of antibodies from one person to another. Now, antibodies are just the product of a B plasma cell. They aren't the actual B plasma cells, or they aren't B memory cells, because you can't transfer those. Why can't you transfer a cell into someone? So hopefully you're thinking about this. You can pause if you need to, try and come up with an answer. But what I'm looking for is the fact that they don't have your antigens. So you can't give yourself a transfusion of B plasma cells from someone else. Because if you do that, your own immune system will start to recognize their antigens as not being the same as yours. So therefore your body's going to reject them. So there's no involvement of your own immune system when it comes to passive immunity, because it's just these antibodies. Very, very immediate. No memory. And the best example of this kind of passive immunity is the mother breastfeeding her child. So a mother breastfeeding her child will pass on her own antibodies through her breast milk to her child. The child doesn't develop any immunity itself. It doesn't develop any memory cells, but it does get protection against various germs that are out there. At the moment, we are talking about antibody transplants between people that have had COVID. Can we take their blood and extract their antibodies and give them to other people? So that would be a form of passive immunity. The next one we've got is active immunity. This is the one where your body has to do some work. So your own immune system gets activated. You develop your own B plasma, your own B memory cells, and so therefore you get this immunological memory. So this happens if you are, say, exposed to a disease, you develop these, or if you get a vaccination. But the problem with this one, as we talked about with our graph, is that it's quite slow. So the passive immunity is really, really fast or immediate, whereas the active immunity is really, really slow. So the next 2 words we're going to look at are natural and artificial immunity. So natural immunity is kind of your chance encounter. You might accidentally get access to an antigen from somewhere. So best example, you get sick, or you get exposed to a pathogen. So you catch chickenpox. Good example is that you catch chickenpox and therefore you develop your own immunity. The other type is a mother breastfeeding her child. That is a natural form of immunity. We aren't injecting anything into the child. The child is just feeding the way that we were designed to feed. I'm not saying that works, but it does. If it does work, then that's the case. And this develops after you naturally encounter a pathogen. So therefore, the opposite of natural immunity is going to be your artificial immunity. This is when you intentionally inject someone or spray them up the nose with something. You purposefully put the antigens into their body. So the best one of these are your vaccinations. Or they could even just be an injection of antibodies like we were talking. So there are your 4 different types. So that should be summarized on your first page, which is page 2. And then we're going to link them together in this little table. So I want you to pause and try and think of examples of something that is active and natural, something that is active and artificial, something that is passive and natural, and something that is passive and artificial. And hopefully we come back now. All right, so it's not in the table anymore, but because it didn't like to do that. But let's start with this one here. So this one here is your active natural immunity. So this is when you are infected and you develop your own antibodies and memory cells. All right, so this is things like the chicken pox. If you get the chicken pox or if you get COVID, that would mean that you are developing active natural immunity. The next one we're going to talk about is active artificial immunity. This is when you inject them and you develop your own antibodies and memory cells. All right, this is a vaccine. A vaccine will give you this artificial active immunity. Then we go down the bottom here is passive natural immunity. This is when you get antibodies directly through the placenta, through breast milk. So this is breastfeeding. Is a really good example of this one. And the final one we've got is your passive artificial immunity. So this is when you give someone antivenom or you inject antibodies, which is what we were talking about, is a possible treatment for COVID. The top two are the main and the best ways that we get immunity, but the bottom two are really helpful to have because A, we can't vaccinate small babies because their immune system isn't developed enough yet. So that's why we need that passive natural immunity from breast milk. And then the second one is the passive artificial immunity, and that's if you get something, like if you got COVID and you didn't have time to develop your own resistance to it. So you might be able to inject someone with antibodies to give their system a boost while their memory B cells are approaching. So that is a really nice way of looking at these specific ways of acquiring immunity.